There is a man in a tent, and he cannot sleep. The year is something like 170 AD, maybe 171, and the tent sits on frozen mud near the Danube where the river smells like iron and rot, and the bodies of barbarians float downstream in the grey water, and nobody retrieves them because there are too many and because there is plague in. The camp and the soldiers will not touch the dead anymore if they can help it. The man is 60 years old, or close to it, and his joints ache in a way that tells him something is breaking down inside him, something fundamental, something that will not be repaired. His name is Marcus Aurelius Antoninus Augustus, Emperor of Rome. And he has a notebook open in front of him and a reed pen that keeps splitting at the tip because the cold makes everything brittle. The ink, the parchment, his fingers, and he is writing to himself. Not to us, never to us. He didn't want us to read this. He didn't title it Meditations. He titled it To Himself, Ta Eis Heoton, like a man grabbing his own collar and shaking, like a man slapping his own face in the dark to stay awake. That's what this book is. Not wisdom literature, not a guide for living your best life. A man on the edge of the known world, in a damp leather tent that smells like tallow and sweat and something worse underneath, trying to talk himself out of despair. And we turned him into a self-help brand. We put his face on Instagram quotes next to pictures of sunsets. We sell his private desperation as morning routine philosophy. We treat his bleeding out onto the page as a productivity hack. And that is obscene, genuinely obscene, because if you actually sit with what he wrote, if you read it slowly, late, when the house is quiet and you can hear your own pulse, what you find is not a man at peace. What you find is a man at war with himself, a man trying to manufacture reasons to get out of bed when every single thing he loves is dying or turning against him or rotting from the inside. Think about the irony. Just sit with it for a second. Here is the most powerful human being on the planet. He commands legions. He controls the fate of 60 million people. He could have anything, anyone, any pleasure the ancient world could offer. And his son, Commodus, the boy he raised, the heir he groomed, is already showing the signs of something terrible, something vain and cruel and theatrical. And Marcus knows it. He has to know it. Because Marcus is not stupid. Marcus is brutally, painfully perceptive about human failure, and yet he cannot fix this. He cannot fix his own son. The plague, the Antonine plague, which was probably smallpox, is killing 5 million people across the empire. His generals scheme. The Parthians push from the east. The Marcomanni push from the north. His co-emperor Lucius Verus drank himself to death. His wife Faustina is rumored to have been unfaithful, though whether that is true or just the usual Roman slander machine is impossible to know, and Marcus, characteristically, says almost nothing about it except to note in Book 1 that she was obedient, affectionate, and without pretension, which is either genuine love or the most controlled act of public forgiveness ever written, and either way it is heartbreaking. So he writes, not for an audience, for survival. And what does he write? Not comfort, not reassurance. He writes the most vicious deconstructions of everything humans pretend to care about that anyone has ever committed to parchment. He strips things naked. That's the technique. He calls it something like objective representation, seeing a thing for what it actually is, materially, physically, without the story we drape over it. And it is savage. Watch him do it. Purple robes, the mark of imperial power, the thing that makes senators bow and soldiers salute. Sheep's wool dyed with the blood of a shellfish. That's it. That's all it is. Sheep hair and dead snail juice. Sexual intercourse? The friction of a piece of gut. And, following a sort of convulsion, the expulsion of some mucus. He isn't being crude for shock value. He is trying to break the spell of glamour, of importance, of meaning that we coat over the raw physical facts of existence to make them bearable. He is peeling the skin off life to look at the muscle and bone underneath and saying, look at this. This is what you are killing yourself for. This is what keeps you up at night. This is what you sacrifice your peace for. And it is just meat and fluid and matter that will be in the ground inside of 70 years. Fame. He is obsessed with fame, or rather, obsessed with destroying the idea of fame. He calls it the clatter of tongues. He asks himself, again and again, who remembers the great men of 2 generations ago? 3? Who remembers the doctors and the generals and the philosophers who were celebrated in their own time? Nobody. How many are Chrysippus? How many are Socrates? How many an Epictetus has time already swallowed up? And then the knife twist. It doesn't matter that they were brilliant. It doesn't matter that they were good. Time ate them anyway. Time eats everything. Soon you will have forgotten everything. Soon everything will have forgotten you. He writes that. The Emperor of Rome writes that to himself in a tent by a frozen river while a plague kills his people, and his son practices being a tyrant, and the barbarians sharpen their weapons in the dark across the water. And he gets up the next morning and he holds court and he makes decisions and he leads men into battle and he does his job. How? Why? This is the question that actually matters. Not what did Marcus believe, but why did Marcus keep going? Because the philosophy, if you can even call it that, it's more like a survival mechanism, a set of cognitive tricks a drowning man uses to keep his head above water. The philosophy gives him no comfort. Not really. The Stoic framework tells him the universe is rational, that there is a logos, a kind of organizing intelligence running through everything, and that his role is to align himself with it. But read carefully, and you can feel him struggling to believe it. Book 9. Either the world is a mere confused mass, a mutual interweaving of things and their dispersal, or it is unity and order and providence. If the former, why do I wish to tarry in a random combination and a disorder? Either the universe makes sense or it doesn't, and he is genuinely uncertain which one is true. And that uncertainty, that crack in the wall, is where the whole thing gets unbearably real. Because he is not preaching from certainty, he is clinging to structure the way a man clings to a piece of wreckage in open water. The structure might hold, it might not. He holds on anyway, and the body, God, the body, he comes back to it again and again, the frailty, the disgust, the absolute indignity of being a physical thing, a little flesh, a little breath, and a reason to rule all that is myself. But the flesh is failing. He was sick for most of his adult life. Stomach problems, chest pain, difficulty sleeping. Some historians think he was taking opium-laced theriac just to function, which means the Emperor of Rome may have been writing his most searingly honest thoughts while slightly drugged, the taste of honey and poppy and viper flesh on his tongue, the campfire light flickering on the tent wall, his body refusing to cooperate with his mind's demand for discipline. You are a little soul carrying around a corpse, he writes, quoting Epictetus. And you can feel that he means it literally, that he looks at his own hands and sees dead things, that he understands on a cellular level that he is already in the process of decomposition, that the difference between himself and the bodies floating in the Danube is just a matter of scheduling. And here's the thing that will crack you open if you let it. This is exactly where we are, right now, all of us. Not on the Danube, not commanding legions, but trapped in the same cage. We perform order every day. We get up and we answer emails and we post carefully curated versions of ourselves online and we build personal brands and we accumulate followers and we measure our worth in metrics and we construct elaborate architectures of relevance and importance. And we know in the gut, in the place where no amount of notification dopamine can reach, that it is all foam, Marcus's word, foam on the sea. We are building sandcastles below the tide line and pretending the water isn't coming. And the water is always coming. And we are exhausted, not from the work, from the pretending, from the performance of having it together, from the unrelenting obligation to be optimized, to be rational, to be good, whatever that even means, while feeling absolutely miniature and temporary and alone in a universe that has not once, in 13 billion years, indicated that it gives a damn about any of us. Marcus knows this. He knows it in his marrow. And his obsession with the vortex of change, the endless churning of time that reduces everything to nothing, is not a philosophical position. It is a lived experience. He watched his adopted father, Antoninus Pius, die. He watched his children die, at least 5 of them, maybe more, infants and toddlers gone before they could speak. And he writes almost nothing about this, which is either the most superhuman act of restraint in literary history or the most devastating evidence that some pain is too large for language. He watched his empire crack. He watched his legacy begin to curdle in the person of his only surviving son. And he sat in the dark and he wrote, "All things fade into the storied past and are presently forgotten. And the whole earth is but a point in space, and the whole of human life is but a moment in time." He was right. He was right about every single word. And we hate hearing it because it makes our frantic scrambling for permanence look exactly like what it is. Frantic scrambling. So why get up? Why be decent? Why bother with justice, with kindness, with holding the line? If everything is foam and meat and the friction of atoms and the clatter of tongues that will fall silent inside a century. This is where Marcus does something that I think about constantly, something that keeps me up, something that feels less like philosophy and more like an act of raw, desperate, almost irrational courage. He says, "Do it anyway, not because it will be remembered, not because the universe cares, not because there is a reward, but because the doing is the thing, the action itself is the point. You were made to work," he says, "like a vine is made to bear grapes, like a horse is made to run. The function is not justified by the outcome. The function is the justification. And duty, real duty, the kind that grinds you down and offers nothing in return, becomes a form of rebellion. Against what? Against the void, against the meaninglessness. Against the fact that you are a small, dying animal on a small, dying rock in a universe so large that the distance between galaxies makes your entire civilization look like a speck of mold on a bathroom tile. You do the right thing not because it matters in any cosmic sense, but because it is the only territory you actually control, the only domain where your will means anything, and surrendering it is the one defeat you do not have to accept. That's not serenity, that's war. Internal, grinding, unwinnable, necessary war. And Marcus fights it every single day. You can see the repetition in the text, the same arguments circling back, the same reminders, and it tells you something crucial. It wasn't working. Or rather, it was working the way a tourniquet works, stopping the bleeding but not healing the wound. He has to keep convincing himself, every morning. Again, don't be angry. Don't be afraid. Don't care what they think. Remember you will die. Remember none of this matters. Remember to be just. Remember to be kind. Again, again, again. The most powerful man alive, repeating his own name in the dark, telling himself to get up, to do the work, to not give in. There is a morning near the end. We don't know the exact date. He is in Vindobona, which is modern Vienna, and he is dying, likely from the plague itself, or from whatever long illness had been consuming him for years. And the accounts say he refused food, that he wanted to hurry the process, that he was ready. And I imagine him, though I have no right to, I imagine him putting the notebook down for the last time, the last entry written, the ink drying on words no one was supposed to read, and I imagine him standing, slowly, because everything hurts, and walking to the tent flap and pushing it open and looking out at the gray morning, the frost on the ground, the smoke from the campfires, the sound of soldiers coughing and horses shifting in the cold, and I imagine him standing there knowing that nothing he did will survive the century intact, that his son will undo it all, that the empire will crack and fracture and collapse, that even his name will become a footnote before someone, centuries later, finds a copy of his private notebook and prints it and sells it, and puts it on a shelf between self-help books about morning routines and productivity hacks. And he walks out anyway. That's the whole thing. That's everything. Not happiness, not peace, not enlightenment or transcendence or any of the comfortable words we use to decorate the abyss. Just a tired man walking into a cold morning, knowing he is nothing, knowing everything is nothing, choosing to act as if it matters because the choice itself, the choosing, is the last free act available to a creature that is mostly water and calcium and borrowed time. And maybe that is the only freedom that has ever actually existed. Not the freedom to win, not the freedom to last. The freedom to stand up one more time in a universe that never asked you to and never will, and to do the thing anyway. The decent thing, the hard thing, the thing no one will remember. Because you are here and you are conscious and you have this one unrepeatable moment of being something instead of nothing, and you absolutely refuse to waste it by lying down. The tent flap closes behind him. The notebook stays on the table. The ink is still wet.